Hi everyone, this is the beginning of lesson 8.1, which involves connecting to a data file. In the past, I've shown my students how to connect to a file through a Jupyter notebook, which requires the use of a software program called Anaconda. And in this class, since we've been all remote, we're using Google Colab. When we use Google Colab, we need to build some different ways to connect to external data files. And that often involves an authentication process through our Google Drive. And we also have seen that the files that are hosted in our Google Drive are associated with unique IDs. And we're going to leverage that again in order to connect to a file that has some Uber data in it. Okay, so this is the first step that's critical for running the rest of the examples and exercises in this collection of notes, which is all about data manipulation and analysis with pandas. We also have some data visualization techniques as well. There are a ton of useful methods in here. But before we can do any of it, we have to connect to our data. And I've intentionally tried to show you different ways of doing that. So let's go ahead and try to understand another way of connecting to some data. Okay. This is Uber data. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at that data. It's in a CSV file. And let me just see if I can find it. First of all, what's this here? That's not it. So it's probably in my data folder. Yeah, so here's the Uber data. And if I try to click on it, this is one of those files that I can open with an analogous Google platform. So I have some what looks like geolocation data here for Uber trips, some time and date and latitude, longitude, and then a base, which is probably some sort of central location for the Uber drivers. Okay, so that's what the data looks like, and our goal is going to be to pull this into our Colab notebook and then turn it into a pandas data frame. Okay, so what I have done to begin with is I've gotten the URL that's associated with this Uber data. Okay, so I got that by right-clicking on the data file. Right-click. We've seen this a couple times before, and then I do get link. Right, get link, and then I copied that link. And as you can see in the notebook, I pasted the link right in here in line 5, and I'm giving it a variable name, original URL, original for short. Okay, so I'm going to be referring to that URL, and I'm going to be extracting from it the ID. Okay, notice that I am also importing the pandas library, the requests library, and then a library called string.io, and there's documentation for string.io. Here, that helps us with one small part of this program, which is in line 10, where we need to read the data, the raw CSV data. That actually helps us avoid pulling in some of the metadata that we don't actually want as part of our pandas data frame. Okay, so this is this line in line 7 is going to get just the file ID, and this is a somewhat clever way to do that. So notice that I'm referencing the original URL. I'm using the split technique, which I can use with strings, and I'm splitting according to the forward slashes, okay? And then I'm indexing with the -2, which if we think about it, the item at index -1 would be this view USP equals sharing, and then the item at index -2 is actually going to be this ID. So that's a pretty clever way to extract to identify only the ID portion of this URL, which is this part right here. Okay, and that's what we want. Next I'm going to modify the URL a little bit. This makes it easier for us to get the data that we want. And this I kind of had to figure out through some trial and error and some research. What we can do is create a URL that is just the download URL. So the version of the spreadsheet that would be downloaded avoids some of the extraneous information that's in that file, this Uber data file, that shows up because it's a web-hosted file. So what we can do then is make some modifications. I know this is getting very, very detailed, but what we can do is type in another component of the URL which indicates that this should be treated as the version of the data that could be downloaded. And then notice right here I'm adding file ID, which I defined. So all I'm doing then is tacking on this ID that I've pulled from the URL and putting it onto the end of the download URL. Okay, that's a cleaner version of the data. Okay, so next step here is to create a URL variable using request.get. So request.get is going to take the download URL as an argument, and we're going to use the .text method. And then here we're going to convert to a CSV raw version. And then finally in line 11, we're going to create a pandas data frame using the pandas read CSV method. And the argument is going to be the raw version of the CSV data. Okay. Then lastly in line 12, we're going to do dot head parentheses open close parentheses. That gives us just the first 6 lines of our data frame. Okay, so this block of code should work for you without any modifications at all, because you are accessing a data file that I have on my in my UMass Google Drive, and I set it to be accessible to anyone on the web with the link. So you do not have to change the original URL to match the file that you have in your Google Drive, but you can, and later we're going to try doing that as an exercise so that this is something you're able to do on your own later on. All right, so let's just run this whole block and see what happens. You'll see something. Oh, we don't even have to do authenticate. I guess we're fine there. Okay, so the way this is set up is it turns this CSV file into a pandas data frame that we can then work with and use some of the techniques that we've learned for pandas. Okay, so that's my example for you. The exercise is here to offer you a chance to try to replicate the same thing using a data file that's hosted on your own Google Drive. This is one of those blocks of code that I like to keep handy. I have sort of a file of useful code that I use over and over and over again, and I don't memorize it. I just use it over and over again, and if I forget it or I can't find it, I generally have to search Stack Overflow and remind myself how to do it, because there are a lot of components involved, things that are necessary to get this file into a format that's going to be accessible in a Colab notebook and able to transform into a pandas data frame. Okay? So from here, I'd recommend trying the exercise. and then you'll be heading into the next video, which is some more operations from operations to do with pandas. And what you will see is another data import from a different URL. And this URL is even tidier because the data, if we look at it, you'll see that it's very clean, okay? So this is CSV data only. There's no extraneous information. You can pull the data directly from this page without having to do any of those modifications that we did in the previous example. So you'll be able to just run this code to import the Gapminder data set, and then you will be good to go for the rest of the problems that reference this data set throughout this collection of notes.